James Harrison, real estate mogul from Manhattan, came home 3 hours early to fire the maid he thought was stealing. Security cameras had caught something suspicious. His blind 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been in danger while the maid just watched. But as he silently entered the main parlor of his $20 million penthouse on the Upper East Side, what he saw paralyzed him. His wife Victoria had Emma cornered against the wall, face contorted with rage, hand raised to strike. And the maid, Rosa Martinez, a single mother from the Bronx, stood between them, taking the blow meant for the child. "Not while I'm breathing!" Rosa shouted with a ferocity James had never witnessed. Emma, her sightless eyes wide with terror, clung to the maid like she was her only salvation. Victoria spun around and saw James. Her expression shifted from shock to cold calculation in seconds. "Darling, it's not what it looks like." But James had seen enough. The cameras didn't lie. And now he understood why Emma, blind since birth, always smiled when Rosa arrived and trembled when her mother approached. The truth was darker than any nightmare. He'd been paying a stranger to protect his daughter from her own mother. The Harrison penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, a glass and steel monument to American success. James had built his empire from nothing, transforming abandoned lots in Queens into luxury developments that redefined New York's skyline. At 45, he owned everything money could buy: estates in the Hamptons, private jets, an art collection rivaling small museums. But his greatest treasure was Emma, his 8-year-old daughter, blind since birth due to a rare genetic condition. That October afternoon, James had left a meeting in Boston when his instinct told him something wasn't right. He'd been reviewing security footage on his phone, an obsessive habit since Emma had nearly fallen down the marble stairs the previous year. What he saw in the past week's recordings disturbed him. Moments where Emma appeared to be in dangerous situations, while Rosa, the 32-year-old Mexican-American maid, seemed to just observe without immediately intervening. He decided to return unannounced, canceling the dinner with Japanese investors he'd planned for months. His driver dropped him a block away, so he could enter through the service entrance undetected. He wanted to confront Rosa with irrefutable evidence of her negligence. But as he crossed the Italian marble foyer, he heard raised voices from the main parlor. Victoria's voice, his wife of 10 years, sounded different. Not the honeyed tone she used at charity galas or the professional one she employed with the staff. It was something primitive, cruel, that chilled his blood. He approached silently until he could see the scene through the partially open French doors. Emma was trapped against the wall, her small hands groping the air for escape, tears streaming down her cheeks. Victoria had her gripped by the arm hard enough to leave bruises. "You're as useless as your father," Victoria hissed. "A burden, a mistake that ruins my perfect life. If it wasn't for you and your goddamn blindness, I could divorce with half of everything. But no, I have to pretend to be the perfect mother to the blind girl to maintain my image." Emma sobbed, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Mommy, please, I'm sorry." Victoria raised her hand, and James was about to burst in when Rosa appeared from nowhere, positioning herself between mother and daughter. The blow meant for Emma struck Rosa's face with a sound that echoed through the parlor. Rosa didn't flinch. With a voice of pure steel, she declared, "You can hit me all you want, Mrs. Harrison, but you won't touch Emma while I'm still breathing." Victoria tried to push Rosa aside, but the maid stood firm, creating a human shield around Emma. The child clung to Rosa's uniform, her small fingers finding comfort in the familiar fabric. "You're a servant!" Victoria screamed. "I'll fire you right now." Rosa pulled out her phone with terrifying calm. "Go ahead. But first, would you like to hear the recordings I've been making for the past 6 months? Or would you prefer to see the videos of the other times you've tried to hurt Emma?" The color drained from Victoria's face. That's when she noticed James in the doorway. Her transformation was instantaneous, from monster to victim in a blink. "James, thank God you're here. This woman is saying terrible things. She's confusing Emma." But James had already crossed the room in 3 strides. He swept Emma into his arms, feeling the child tremble violently. The little girl buried her face in his neck, and he could feel hot tears against his skin. "Daddy," Emma whispered, "Rosa saved me." Again. The words, "again," resonated through the room like a death sentence. James carried Emma to her room, where the child finally fell asleep, clutching his hand. Rosa had followed them silently, her left cheek beginning to swell where Victoria had struck her. Victoria had disappeared into her private suite, probably calling her lawyer or inventing her version of events. In James's study, with the doors locked and security cameras turned off, Rosa finally spoke. The story she told destroyed everything James believed he knew about his life. Rosa wasn't just a maid. She was a single mother of 2 who had once been a special education teacher in Texas. She'd lost her teaching license after reporting a powerful school board member for embezzling funds meant for disabled children. The man had destroyed her career with false accusations, forcing her to flee to New York with her children, taking whatever work she could find. From her first day at the Harrison penthouse, she'd noticed the signs in Emma. The way the child tensed when she heard her mother's heels, how her hands instinctively moved to protect her face when Victoria approached. The bruises explained as accidents due to her blindness. Rosa had started documenting everything 6 months ago when she witnessed the first incident. Victoria had pushed Emma for ruining an important dinner by accidentally spilling her water glass. The child had fallen, hitting her head on the coffee table. Rosa had taken her to Mount Sinai Hospital, where doctors accepted the explanation that Emma had tripped. But Rosa knew the truth, and she'd been collecting evidence ever since. Audio recordings, secretly filmed videos, photographs of bruises, a detailed diary of every incident. Everything stored in multiple secure locations, with copies sent to a trusted friend, who was a paralegal. James listened with growing horror as Rosa played some recordings. Victoria's voice, cruel and merciless, telling Emma she was a mistake, a burden, that she wished she'd never been born. Emma's sobs, asking what she'd done wrong. The sound of slaps, followed by a child's crying. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" James asked, his voice broken with guilt and rage. Rosa looked at him with a mixture of compassion and frustration. "Would you have believed me? Victoria Harrison, the perfect society wife, board member of 3 charities for disabled children, versus an immigrant maid barely making ends meet. Who would you have believed?" The truth hurt, because Rosa was right. James had been as blind as his daughter, but his blindness was chosen. He'd ignored the signs, too busy building his empire to see his castle crumbling from within. Rosa continued revealing more horrors. Victoria had been subtly drugging Emma with sedatives to make her more manageable during social events. She'd hired therapists who convinced the child that her perceptions were wrong, that her mother loved her, and any negative memories were her imagination. But the worst came when Rosa revealed Victoria's ultimate plan. She'd found documents on Victoria's laptop about specialized boarding schools in Switzerland, places where Emma could be properly cared for. Essentially, golden prisons for disabled children whose parents wanted to forget they existed. The plan was to convince James it was best for Emma, that she needed specialized care they couldn't provide at home. Once Emma was gone, Victoria planned to file for divorce, painting herself as the martyr who'd sacrificed years caring for a disabled child. Rosa had more to reveal. She pulled out a folder containing printed emails between Victoria and her personal trainer, Marcus. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to frame James for financial crimes using doctored documents. With James in prison and Emma institutionalized, Victoria would have everything. "I have 2 kids of my own," Rosa said, tears finally breaking through her composure. "Maria is 10. Carlos is 7. I see them maybe 2 hours a day because I'm here protecting Emma, but I couldn't watch another child suffer. Not when I could do something. The next 3 days were a legal and emotional battle that shook Manhattan's high society to its core. James had hired the best legal team in New York, but Victoria didn't stay behind. Her father, retired federal judge Alexander Crawford, had connections at every level of the New York judicial system. Victoria had transformed her narrative with Machiavellian mastery. Now she was the victim of an absent husband and a manipulative maid who had brainwashed poor Emma. She hired a PR team that began leaking stories to the press about the emotional kidnapping of Emma by Rosa. The tabloids went wild with the story. The scheming maid, the Upper East Side Triangle, battle for the blind heiress. Photographers camped outside the building, waiting to capture any drama. But Rosa had anticipated this. She activated her network of contacts, including several prominent families where she'd worked before, all willing to testify about her impeccable character. More importantly, she had the recordings. The preliminary custody hearing was a media circus. Victoria arrived in black Chanel, the portrait of the grieving mother. James arrived with Emma, who insisted Rosa accompany her. The child clung to the maid's hand as if it were her anchor to the world. In the judge's chambers, when Emma was called to give her testimony via closed-circuit TV, something extraordinary happened. The 8-year-old, blind but neither deaf nor mute, spoke with a clarity that left everyone breathless. She described in chilling detail each incident, how her mother would pinch her in places that wouldn't leave visible marks, how she'd lock her in the dark closet, where your blindness doesn't matter, when she misbehaved, how Rosa had been the only one who'd protected her, comforted her, truly loved her. But the decisive moment came when Emma revealed something no one knew. Victoria had been stealing from Emma's trust fund, set up by James's late mother. Emma, with her hearing sharpened by blindness, had heard her mother's phone conversations with offshore bankers. Mommy told someone on the phone that once she got rid of me and Daddy, she'd have access to all of Grandma's money, Emma said with a trembling but determined voice. The courtroom exploded. Victoria's lawyer objected furiously, but the damage was done. The judge ordered an immediate audit of the trust fund, which revealed that $3 million had been siphoned off to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Rosa then presented her master evidence, a video taken just a week before, where Victoria discussed the details of her plan with Marcus. How they'd make James look like a negligent father, how they'd institutionalize Emma, how they'd divide the assets. The video also captured something even more damning. Victoria laughing about Emma's blindness, calling her the defective brat, and saying she sometimes thought about solving the problem permanently by staging an accident. The judge's decision was swift and decisive.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Full custody to James, restraining order against Victoria, criminal investigation for child abuse, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Victoria left the courthouse in handcuffs. Her empire of lies collapsed in a matter of hours. But victory tasted bitter. In the penthouse, now empty of Victoria's toxic presence, James faced the reality of what he'd allowed to happen. Emma, free for the first time from constant terror, began showing behaviors she'd suppressed for years. The child had terrible nightmares, waking up screaming for Rosa. She refused to be alone with any adult except her father and the maid. She'd developed nervous tics, constantly touching her face where her mother used to hit her. Rosa, now officially hired as Emma's caregiver and companion, worked tirelessly to heal the invisible wounds. She brought her own children to the penthouse after school, and watching Emma play with Maria and Carlos was the first step in her recovery. The blind girl taught them Braille while they taught her Spanish songs. There was a conversation pending between Rosa and James, one that finally happened one evening while the children played in Emma's room. Sitting on the terrace overlooking Central Park, James finally asked what had tormented him. "Why did you risk everything for a child who wasn't yours?" Rosa watched the city lights before answering. She told him her own story in full. Growing up in El Paso, watching her disabled brother Miguel be tormented by other kids while adults did nothing. How she'd become a special education teacher to protect children like him. How she'd lost everything for doing the right thing, reporting the superintendent who was stealing from disabled kids' programs. "When I saw Emma," Rosa said with silent tears running down her cheeks, "I saw every vulnerable child I couldn't save. I saw my brother. I saw my students. I couldn't save my career, but I could save Emma." James reached out and took Rosa's hand, a gesture of gratitude that transcended words. In that moment, he understood that Rosa wasn't just his daughter's savior. She was the angel the universe had sent to redeem his own failures as a father. But there was something else in that touch, something neither expected, a connection that went beyond employer and employee, beyond gratitude. It was recognition of two souls who'd found each other in the darkness. A year after the trial, life in the Harrison penthouse had found a new rhythm. Emma, now 9, had blossomed under Rosa's loving care and her father's dedicated attention. She attended a specialized school for visually impaired children, where she quickly became one of the top students. The most notable transformation was her confidence. The girl who once flinched at every sound now walked with her head high, her white cane moving confidently as she navigated the world. She'd started learning violin, discovering a natural talent that filled her with joy. Rosa's children had become part of the family. Maria and Carlos spent every afternoon at the penthouse, doing homework with Emma, teaching her games, being the siblings she'd never had. James had set up college funds for both of them, insisting it was the least he could do for the woman who'd saved his daughter. The relationship between James and Rosa had evolved into something deeper. They were co-parents in everything but name, united by their shared love for Emma. But there was more. Late evening conversations after the children were asleep, shared laughs over Emma's jokes, the way Rosa's eyes lit up when James came home early, the way his day felt incomplete if he didn't see her smile. One spring afternoon, while the 4 children played in Central Park, Rosa's 2 and Emma in the middle, James watching from a bench with Rosa beside him, Emma made an observation that took their breath away. "You know," Emma said with the characteristic frankness of children, "I don't need to see to know you two love each other." James and Rosa looked at each other, the truth hanging between them like morning mist. It was true, of course. Somewhere between the crisis and healing, between tears and laughter, they'd fallen in love. Not the tempestuous, selfish love James had with Victoria, but something deeper, born of mutual respect and shared purpose. "Emma," Rosa began gently, "things aren't that simple." "Why not?" Emma interrupted. "Rosa, you're more my mother than the woman who gave birth to me. Dad, you're happier since Rosa's been with us. Maria and Carlos are like my brother and sister. We're already a family. Why not make it official?" That evening, after all 3 children were asleep, Maria and Carlos had started staying over on weekends. James and Rosa had the conversation they'd been avoiding. "I'm a maid," Rosa said quietly. "A single mother from the Bronx with 2 kids and a GED. You're James Harrison. Your world would never accept us." James took her hands in his. "My world accepted Victoria. And look how that turned out. I don't want that world anymore. I want this. You, me, Emma, Maria, and Carlos. This messy, beautiful, real family we've built. Your business associates, and go to hell if they don't accept the woman who saved my daughter's life." He paused, gathering courage. "Rosa, I love you. Not out of gratitude, not out of convenience. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you're happy, how you make Emma laugh, how you've made this cold penthouse into a home." Rosa's tears fell freely now. "I love you too, but I'm scared. What if—" James silenced her with a kiss, soft and sure. When they pulled apart, Emma's voice came from the doorway. Finally, Maria owes me $5. She bet you wouldn't kiss until Christmas. The wedding was small, intimate, perfect. Just 50 guests in the rooftop garden of the penthouse, with Emma as the radiant maid of honor and Maria and Carlos as flower girl and ring bearer. When James and Rosa exchanged vows, all three children stood between them, their hands joined in a circle of 5. The media had their field day, of course. From Maid to Mrs. The cleaner who cleaned up his life. Billionaire marries the help. But the new Harrison family didn't care. They'd learned that public opinion was sand compared to the rock of their mutual love. Victoria, from prison where she served time for child abuse and embezzlement, tried to create trouble by suing for alienation of affection. It was dismissed in minutes. Marcus had fled to Brazil. His fitness empire collapsed under fraud investigations. But the real miracle came 6 months after the wedding. Rosa had been feeling unwell, attributing it to the stress of managing her new foundation for abused, disabled children. It was Emma, with her heightened perception, who noticed first. "Rosa," she said one morning at breakfast, "you smell different, like sweeter." The pregnancy test confirmed what Emma had intuited. Rosa was pregnant. The joy in the house was palpable, but also fear. How would the children react? Would they feel displaced? Their fears were unfounded. All three children were ecstatic. Emma spent hours with her hands on Rosa's growing belly, feeling the baby's kicks, singing songs, telling stories about the wonderful family it would join. Maria and Carlos argued over names and whether they wanted a brother or sister. When the baby was born, a boy they named Miguel, after Rosa's brother, Emma insisted on being the first to hold him after his parents. With infinite care, she cradled her baby brother, her sensitive fingers gently exploring his features. "He's perfect," she declared, "and he's lucky. He's born into a family where love doesn't need eyes to be seen." 2 years later, the family had grown again with the arrival of Isabella, a vivacious girl who from day one seemed to understand that her big sister couldn't see, but perceived everything. The penthouse that had once been a cold marble mausoleum had transformed into a home filled with children's laughter. Rosa's foundation had expanded to provide free therapy and legal aid to families with disabled children facing abuse. James had reduced his business operations to spend more time with his family, discovering that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments. Emma, now 12, had become a confident, brilliant preteen. She played violin in charity concerts, spoke 3 languages, and had started writing a blog about her experience to help other children in similar situations. Her post about Rosa, the maid who became my mother, went viral, inspiring thousands. One evening, as the family had dinner together, a sacred tradition they'd established, Emma made an announcement. "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up," she said, with the determination she'd inherited from both parents. "What, sweetheart?" asked Rosa, now pregnant with their 3rd child together. "A civil rights lawyer specializing in disability and children's rights. I want to be the voice for those who can't speak for themselves, the eyes for those who can't see danger coming." James felt tears prick his eyes. His daughter, who had suffered so much, had transformed her pain into purpose. Rosa squeezed his hand under the table, sharing the moment of profound pride. "But," Emma continued with a mischievous smile, "first, I need to finish school. And Dad needs to help me with math because numbers make no sense when you can't see them." The family burst into laughter, the sound filling every corner of the penthouse that had once harbored so much pain. It was the sound of complete healing, of triumphant love, of a family forged not just by blood, but by choice and sacrifice. 5 years later, Emma Harrison, 17 years old, gave the valedictorian speech at her school. With her white cane in one hand and her braille notes in the other, she spoke to an audience of 500 about the power of unconditional love and the courage of those who defend the defenseless. "My mother," she said, referring to Rosa, taught me that true vision doesn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. She saved me, not just from physical danger, but from a darkness deeper than my blindness. She taught me that family isn't who gives you life, but who would fight to protect it. In the audience, Rosa wept openly, 5-year-old Miguel on her lap, 3-year-old Isabella clinging to her hand, baby David sleeping in James's arms, while Maria and Carlos, now in college thanks to James's support, beamed with pride. The woman who'd come to Manhattan as a broken single mother trying to make ends meet was now the matriarch of a family that had redefined the meaning of love. James, looking at his gathered family, finally understood the deepest truth. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought was important to find what really matters. Sometimes the hero isn't the one with power, but the one with the courage to use whatever little they have to protect the vulnerable. And sometimes, just sometimes, a maid can save not just a child, but an entire family, transforming a penthouse of nightmares into a home of dreams come true. Emma ended her speech with words that resonated in every heart present. My name is Emma Harrison. I've been blind since birth, but I see more clearly than many with perfect vision. I see love, I see sacrifice, I see courage, and I see a future where every child, regardless of their challenges, has someone like my mother Rosa, someone willing to stand between them and harm, no matter the cost. The applause was thunderous, but for the Harrison family, the only sound that mattered was the synchronized beating of their hearts, united forever by a maid who dared to protect a blind girl when no one else would. Like, if you believe true heroism is protecting the defenseless, comment with the moment that touched you most. Share to honor all who protect vulnerable children. Subscribe for more stories of courage and family redemption. Sometimes angels come disguised as maids. Sometimes the deepest blindness is of the heart. And sometimes protecting one child can save an entire family.